The dog appeared to be solely for emotional support, but when the child performed a quiet signal, the dog revealed a truth that had remained unspoken. The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio, felt overwhelmingly large for her. 8-year-old Tanya Ellison sat upright in her chair, her feet dangling above the floor, holding the leash of her golden retriever, Milo, firmly in her hands. Her braids were neatly done, and her pink barrettes made a quiet clicking sound with any head movement. She spoke little, showed no signs of nervousness, simply remained still and observant, appearing remarkably composed for a child in a room filled with unfamiliar faces, awaiting a discussion of subject no child should need to comprehend. Beside her, Milo remained motionless as well. He sat close, his eyes partially closed, his comforting presence against her leg. Many assumed the dog's purpose was to ease her anxiety and provide a sense of security within the imposing environment. And while that was a contributing factor, there was a deeper significance, far more than met the eye. From a bench, Judge Mark Halbard looked down. He was in his 60s, his gray hair thinning and his glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. Throughout his career, he had presided over numerous cases, gang violence, difficult family court proceedings, and even widely publicized trials. However, something about this young girl held his complete attention. Perhaps it was the calm focus in her eyes, or perhaps it was the dog, or maybe it was the fact that not a single person in the courtroom, even the defense attorney, was able to elicit a reaction from her. The room held a considerable number of people, enough that quiet murmurs occasionally arose as someone moved closer to whisper. Seated on the left was the defendant, Russell Banning, a man in his late 40s with short hair, a pressed shirt, and his hands carefully placed in his lap. His lawyer repeatedly tapped a pen against the table, anticipating the cross-examination. Tanya had not yet glanced at Russell. Kendra Ellison, her mother, was seated 2 rows back, quietly holding a tissue in one hand and a cross necklace in the other. She hadn't uttered a word since entering the building, simply keeping her gaze fixed on her daughter, hoping the moment would quickly pass. She feared it wouldn't. Judge Halbard then cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ellison, are you ready?" Tanya glanced at her court-appointed therapist, who offered a slight nod from the front bench. She did not return the smile, only offered a single nod. "Yes, Your Honor," the therapist responded on her behalf. "She is ready." The judge nodded briefly and turned to the bailiff. "Bring the witness." A door opened to the side, and 2 officers entered. The man accused of changing Tanya's life walked deliberately to the stand, attempting to appear calm, but his eyes repeatedly darted toward Milo, and Milo, who had been entirely relaxed until that moment, raised his head. Tanya didn't react, though her hold on the leash became a little firmer. No one observed it. The prosecutor rose, straightened her jacket, and started her questioning. "Mr. Banning, can you state where you were on the night of August 14th? Russell moved closer to the microphone. "At home, watching TV. "Alone?" "Yes." "And do you expect us to simply accept that?" He relaxed against the chair. "I'm being truthful." From the visitor's area, Kendra's hand squeezed the tissue once more. Tanya avoided his gaze, yet her breathing altered a delicate, regulated rhythm, as if deliberately cultivating composure. The interrogation continued, initially focusing on establishing sequences of events. Then, the photographs were presented, images that should never be displayed in a courtroom. Tanya averted her eyes. Milo moved nearer to her. The atmosphere in the room diminished. The weight of the moment was palpable, not from the spoken words, but from their absence. Russell subtly adjusted his position. He asserted that her account was fabricated, interrupting the prosecutor's subsequent inquiry. "That dog," he commented, "is simply trained to respond. This entire situation is a fabrication." At that moment, Tanya deliberately raised her hand, positioning it behind her back. She then tapped her fingers twice, gently. The movement was subtle, barely perceptible. A missed blink would have meant overlooking it entirely. Milo's ears immediately rose. However, none of the individuals present anticipated what he would do next. Approximately 2 months prior to the court proceedings, Tanya was seated on a folding chair in her aunt's backyard in Decatur, Georgia, observing Milo pursue a red tennis ball across the lawn. The sun was beginning its descent, bathing the surroundings in a golden hue. She held the ball in her hand, but refrained from throwing it. Not yet. Her aunt, Carla Newsom, stood nearby with her arms crossed, a gentle smile gracing her features. Carla was resilient. A retired canine handler, she had previously worked in narcotics in Dallas before relocating closer to family. Around Tanya, that rigidity eased. Carla knelt beside her and met her gaze. "Are you certain you want to do this, dear?" she asked. "We don't have to if you're not ready." Tanya didn't respond immediately. She looked at Milo again, now lying on his back in the grass, tail thumping. Then she looked back at her aunt. "I don't want him to look at me," she said quietly. Carla nodded. "Then we'll teach Milo how to watch for you." It started gradually with simple games. Carla would often sit on the opposite side of the yard with a companion, role-playing as if they didn't know each other. If Tanya tapped her left shoe one time, Milo would remain still. If she tapped twice behind her back, Milo was trained to move and position himself between her and the person in front of her. This required consistent effort. Each day following school, and every weekend. Tanya was reserved, but she demonstrated a strong focus. Milo learned rapidly. He possessed a calm demeanor, intelligence, and above all, unwavering loyalty. Whenever he noticed Tanya exhibiting tension, he would instinctively move nearer. A strong bond was forming between them, a quiet and specialized team with a shared, unspoken mission. Carla observed them from the porch, occasionally recording observations, and, at other times, allowing them undisturbed time. On one evening following their work, Carla offered Tanya a bottle of water and sat close to her. "You need to understand that in court they may question your account," she stated cautiously. "Adults often feel anxious. They resist being proven incorrect." Tanya averted her gaze. "What if I make a mistake?" Carla reassured her. "You won't. And should you become overwhelmed, that's why Milo is present." He intended for them to recall his perspective. A moment of stillness followed. Then, an unusual inquiry from Tanya arose. "Do you believe he recalls what he inflicted upon me?" Carla remained silent. She preferred not to deceive. Therefore, she responded, "Perhaps not as you do, but individuals like him retain enough to be apprehensive of the truth." That evening, Kendra arrived to collect Tanya. Her gaze was weary, posture slumped. Carla drew her away before she re-entered the vehicle. "She possesses greater resilience than appears," Carla murmured. "Ensure she isn't bearing this burden by herself. When a moment arrives, meet that man directly." Kendra acknowledged, though her lips shook. Prior to their departure, Tanya returned and embraced Carla. "Thank you," she whispered against her shirt. Carla held her a little longer than normal. The day preceding the court appearance, they conducted one final meeting. Carla wore an old hoodie and mirrored sunglasses, attempting to replicate the courtroom environment. She even rehearsed a few assertive phrases she envisioned a lawyer might use. It wasn't ideal, but it provided assistance. Tanya signaled Milo. Milo positioned himself between her and Carla, remaining steadfast, vigilant, unwavering. Carla felt a constriction in her throat. "Okay," she stated, her voice softer than normal. It was one thing to be prepared, and another entirely to witness it unfold in actuality. Back in that courtroom in Toledo, Tanya remained perfectly still. Milo, now attentive, hadn't moved since she gave the double tap. Russell Banning observed a change in his posture, moving from relaxed to protective. His head rose, his chest moved forward, and his eyes focused intently on the man seated across the room. He subtly leaned away, holding the witness stand's edge. His expression grew strained, though he attempted to mask it with a forced smile. The gesture was not returned, neither by the jury, nor by the judge, nor even by his own attorney, who briefly looked at the dog with a worried twitch in his jaw. Andrea Selden, the prosecutor, paused briefly before resuming. "Mr. Banning, you previously testified that you were by yourself on August 14th. There were no witnesses and no communication records like phone calls or text messages. Is that still your account?" Russell moved his chair. That is what I stated, yes. Andrea approached him. You also affirmed that you had never encountered the minor involved in this case, correct? His gaze momentarily moved towards Tanya. Correct. I'm not familiar with her. Never spoken to her? No. Never visited her school? I said no. The atmosphere in the room became more subdued. The quiet rustling of papers had ceased. Every gaze was fixed on Tanya. She remained looking down, but Milo hadn't diverted his eyes from Russell. Not once. Judge Halberd leaned forward a little. Andrea turned to Tanya, her voice softening. Tanya, do you feel safe right now? Tanya didn't speak. Instead, she reached down and touched Milo's back. He didn't move, but the growl was so quiet, it almost sounded like a tremor. Just enough to be heard. Enough to shatter the silence. Russell blinked. I want to be clear, Andrea stated, maintaining a calm tone. The dog had been specifically trained for her protection, under the direction of a certified canine handler. He is not reacting to anxiety, but to behavior. Gerald Lasky, the defense attorney, abruptly stood. Objection. This is speculative. Judge Halberd raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Lasky. You will have your opportunity. Gerald resumed his seat, appearing unassured. Andrea approached the bench and picked up a small folder. Pursuant to the court's approval, I would like to present a short video documenting Tanya's therapy sessions. Permission granted, the judge stated. The screen descended behind the witness stand. A video commenced playing. It depicted Tanya in her aunt's backyard, peacefully walking with Milo. Carla appeared in the frame, portraying different scenarios. One tap, Milo remained by her side. Two taps. He advanced, his demeanor shifting similarly to how it had been in court. Following the video's conclusion, a significant silence ensued. Judge Halberd then addressed Russell directly. I have presided over many trials. I have encountered numerous courtroom dogs, therapy animals, and trained service animals. However, I have never witnessed an animal react with such immediate instinct. Russell attempted to speak, but remained silent. Tanya then raised her gaze, deliberately and quietly. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle. He does not speak loudly. He only whispers. Andrea turned towards her with kindness. Who, dear? Tanya indicated the man on the stand. Him. A profound silence filled the courtroom. Russell rose quickly. This is a fabrication. Are you allowing a child and a dog to determine my fate? Milo advanced, his growl intensifying. The bailiff intervened swiftly. Sir, please be seated. However, Russell remained standing. He increased his volume. This isn't factual material. It's maneuvering, Milo stated, with a single distinct bark. The judge struck his gavel. Sufficient. Any further disruptions, and you will be ejected from this courtroom. Russell retreated to his chair, his face ashen. He mumbled something quietly, but it was inaudible. The jury observed intently, motionless. Tanya leaned back in her chair, her hand still on Milo's back. She remained silent. However, the truth was no longer concealed within the evidence or legal language. It was now plainly visible to all. One could sense the gravity of the situation. It wasn't a boisterous moment. It wasn't theatrical. It was silent, as if the atmosphere in the courtroom had been suddenly removed. Judge Halbert straightened his glasses and looked toward the bailiff. Let's take a 5-minute recess. He addressed the jurors. Please remain seated. The gavel struck the desk, yet there was no movement. There was no whispering, no throat clearing, only silence. Milo stood motionless, positioned before Tanya, gazing intently at Russell Banning as if he possessed prior knowledge of the outcome. Carla, positioned behind the barrier, made eye contact with her niece. She offered a slight nod, not to influence her, but to signal her presence. Weeks earlier, she had explained to Tanya that you don't need to be loud to anyone. The truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it simply observes. That's what Milo was doing currently, observing, remaining still. Across the room, Russell was falling apart. He pulled at his collar, adjusted his posture, and spoke quietly to his attorney. His voice had changed, now more pointed and uncertain. The composed demeanor he's arrived with was gone, replaced by a noticeable unease. It was obvious to everyone. Your Honor, Andrea said softly, easing the strain. Could the child please stay seated here with her support animal during the break? The judge nodded. She may remain seated as long as she is comfortable. Gerald Lasky, still red-faced, leaned toward Russell, whispering intensely. But his client appeared to be sweating now. Milo hadn't moved. He didn't bark again. He didn't growl again. He didn't need to. The prosecutor approached Carla close to the bench. Was that signal scheduled for today? Carla didn't blink. It was always a last resort. She had never used it until now. Andrea nodded slowly. He must have triggered it without even knowing. She knew what to look for, Carla said. He must have done it before. Back at the bench, Judge Halberd reviewed the footage again quietly on his monitor. His lips tightened. He'd been on the bench long enough to know that not all evidence fits neatly into paper or testimony. Sometimes it walks on four legs and growls when a child is too afraid to speak. Following the recess, the proceedings restarted as if no interruption had occurred. However, a change was palpable. Your Honor, Andrea stated, rising to her feet, with your permission, I would like to recall Detective Lorna Morales to the stand for a brief clarification. Proceed, the judge responded. Detective Morales approached, her boots making a quiet clicking sound on the tile. She had been involved in the investigation from the beginning, when the available evidence consisted of a nebulous assertion and a child hesitant to articulate their account. Earlier, her statement had been concise. Andrea presented her with a printed photograph. Detective, is this familiar to you? Morales examined the image. It depicted Russell Banning at an elementary school field day, Tanya's school. He was not an employee. He was not a parent. He was simply a guest volunteer coordinated through a now-defunct mentorship program. Was this man permitted access to the children without supervision during the event? Andrea inquired. No, Morales stated directly. He was not. And was he discovered in a classroom alone with a student? Yes, Tanya Ellison. There it was. That was the moment Milo shifted again. His ears twitched. His body leaned forward just slightly, defensively again. Every juror's eyes followed that subtle movement. Andrea turned to the jury. You observe the video. You observe the training. You observe the dog's instinct. Now you see why Russell stood up again. This is absurd. This is emotional manipulation. The bailiff took a step forward. Judge Halberd's voice rose. Mr. Banning, please be seated. You're not permitted to speak again unless directly addressed. However, Russell couldn't restrain himself. She is fabricating the story, fabricating it all with that dog. Milo advanced one step, displaying no bark, no growl, only his presence. It was then that a shift occurred. A single juror, an older woman wearing a blue sweater, removed her glasses and massaged her temples. Her gaze turned toward another juror, a younger man in his 30s. A shared understanding passed between them, as if a crucial element had finally aligned. However, what followed extended beyond simple validation. It concerned revealing the truth about this man and uncovering any concealed aspects of his character. The courtroom was now engrossed, anticipating each movement, observing every respiration, each involuntary gesture, and every look from Russell Banning. The jury members were no longer relaxed. They were intently focused. Judge Halbert massaged his eyes behind his spectacles. He remained largely silent, yet it was evident a change had occurred within him as well. He had witnessed numerous defendants falter under questioning, but Russell wasn't merely breaking. He was falling apart before their eyes. Andrea stepped back to the podium, her voice even and composed. Detective Morales, did you interview any other parents who observed Mr. Banning interacting with students that day? Morales responded, yes, 3 in total. Someone reported giving a child candy without authorization. Another stated they followed a student into the restroom. Was that student identified? Morales confirmed. Yes. You could hear someone in the gallery whisper, my God. Judge Halbert did not issue a reprimand. He remained silent. Gerald Lasky, attempting to reassert himself, rose. Your Honor, this is speculative. None of those allegations were substantiated, Andrea countered. The statements remained unchallenged, each one delivered before the victim had a chance to respond. Lasky's objection lingered, but it was not sustained. He then took his seat. Andrea turned back to the judge. I request permission to recall the school counselor, Ms. Jenna Holbrook, for follow-up, she stated. Granted, replied Halbert. Ms. Holbrook approached the stand with a quiet seriousness. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, with a thin but clear voice. She adjusted her blazer and spoke directly. Following the school event, I saw Tanya on several occasions. While she was quiet, she frequently drew. Her drawings consistently featured the same man, glasses, shirt, and always positioned behind her. Andrea presented the drawing to the judge and jury. Though a child's artwork, the likeness was undeniable. It depicted Russell, with the same square glasses and jawline. Notably, next to a small representation of herself, was a dog, Milo. She hadn't encountered Milo before this, correct? Andrea questioned, but not until weeks passed. A silence followed. Then Andrea faced Russell. Mr. Banning, can you clarify how a child you assert you've never encountered described you, including your glasses, weeks prior to any legal actions? Russell's lips parted. He closed them, then opened them again. I'm unsure, he mumbled. Perhaps she's disoriented or recalling something, Andrea suggested. The jury remained impassive. The entire courtroom did. Immediately afterward, the courtroom doors swung open. A woman entered discreetly and presented a note to the bailiff. He examined the note, then proceeded directly to the judge. Halbert received the paper, adjusted his glasses, and read it carefully. His eyebrows rose a little. Ms. Selden, he stated, it seems another person has come forward during the break. A former teacher's assistant from Hickory Trail Elementary. She asserts she possesses information directly relevant to this case. She's outside, prepared to testify. Andrea turned her head slowly toward Russell. Remarkably, Hickory Trail falls outside of this jurisdiction. Russell visibly struggled, his jaw tightening. Gerald Lasky moved closer, whispering to his client. Russell dismissed him. Nobody here knows anything, he mumbled. She's simply attempting to damage my reputation. Andrea stepped away. The doors opened once more. A woman, appearing to be in her early 30s, entered. Bridget Alston, her identification tag still attached to her coat. She assumed the witness stand, took the oath, and commenced her testimony. I remember him, she stated, indicating Russell. He volunteered at our school for 3 months in 2019. We received complaints, several, but they never resulted in action because people didn't want to trust the children. Judge Halbert moved closer. Did you file a report? Yes, on 2 occasions, but I was instructed not to escalate the matter. Andrea paused, allowing the jury a moment to process this information. Then Milo made a sudden, brief single bark. Russell visibly reacted. Tanya remained still. Without raising her head, she extended her hand and gave Milo a deliberate, comforting scratch behind the ears. The courtroom now comprehended. Milo's actions weren't erratic. He wasn't displaying distress. He was reacting purposefully, naturally, and with intention. However, what remained unknown was that the ultimate determination wouldn't be derived from the documented evidence. It would stem from the jury's visceral understanding. The courtroom was no longer impartial. It had taken a position, subtly but undeniably. The atmosphere was palpable, evident in the juror's posture, the judge's gesture of pressing his fingertips together, and the measured silence of Andrea Selden, which spoke volumes. The evidence was presented, but it was the responses that resonated. Milos's, Tanya's, and Russell's cut through the surrounding tension. Judge Halbert addressed the jury box, stating, "We will break for deliberation immediately. Jurors, you will be escorted to the conference room." As the jurors rose and exited, Russell slumped heavily into his chair. A slight tremor ran through his hands, though he attempted to conceal it by adjusting his cuffs. Gerald Lasky murmured something to him once more, but Russell offered no reply. His gaze was fixed on Tanya, and she, remaining silent and composed, averted her head. Milo settled back into a relaxed posture, his body curled beside her, his head resting on her shoe, as if the storm had subsided. As if his duties were complete, temporarily, the gallery stayed silent. The room remained still, save for Carla, who rose to stretch and walked over, placing a gentle hand on her sister's shoulder. Kendra hadn't seemed to breathe since the testimony began. Her fingers were red from repeated twisting. "You did well," Carla whispered. "You did better," she responded. The jury had been absent for almost 2 hours. Upon their return, the bailiff brought the room to order. Judge Halbert appeared more weary than previously, but his voice remained firm. "Have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with a weathered suit and a tight jaw, rose. "We do, Your Honor." The question came, "And how do you find the defendant, Russell Banning, on the count of criminal misconduct with a minor?" "Guilty," the foreman stated, the word falling with a weighty certainty. It resonated, clear enough for all present. "Regarding the count of trespassing on school property with intent to harm?" "Guilty." Russell Banning's shoulders slumped. He remained silent, offering no outburst. The outburst had ceased. Only a sense of quiet acceptance lingered. Andrea shut her binder. There were no celebratory gestures, no smiles, just a feeling of relief. Securing a case such as this doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like air flowing back into a space that was suffocated for too long. Judge Halbert addressed Tanya. "Ms. Ellison, I observe that you spoke sparingly today, but you conveyed more than many adults ever manage. And I believe you." Tanya remained composed, but she nodded. "And Milo," Halbert peered over his glasses. "I've never expressed this in a courtroom, but if I possessed a medal to award, he would be wearing it." A few people chuckled softly for the first time in hours. Subsequently, in the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters assembled. Microphones, cameras, the typical commotion. Kendra moved protectively before her daughter. "No questions today," she stated firmly. "We're simply going home." Carla opened the passenger door. Milo entered first. Then Tanya climbed in beside him. The car ride home was quiet. Carla remained silent. Kendra didn't press. However, halfway along the highway, Tanya spoke up. "Will he go away forever?" Kendra glanced in the rearview mirror. "I don't know, baby, but he won't hurt you again. That's for sure." Tanya stroked Milo's fur. He licked her hand. Upon arriving home, Carla hung up her coat and reached for the leash to walk Milo. Tanya followed her to the door. "Can I come?" "You don't have to." "I want to." Beneath a pale sky, they walked in silence. There were no cars, no barking, only the sound of gravel beneath their shoes. At one moment, Tanya paused and looked upwards. "Do you think other kids are scared like I was?" Carla nodded. Tanya fell silent for a moment. Then she inquired, "Can we teach other dogs, too?" Carla regarded her. This little girl who had once gone completely silent, now formulating plans. "Yeah," she replied softly. "I think we can." But this story wasn't simply about a dog or a courtroom. The focus was on the moment a child's experiences are finally validated, and when staying silent isn't the only path to safety. 2 weeks following the trial, subtle changes began to emerge. These weren't dramatic or obvious, but appeared in minor details that only a select few observed. Tanya was able to sleep soundly through the night without any awakenings. Kendra ceased the habit of leaving all the lights on in the house. And Milo, he stopped standing watch outside Tanya's bedroom door. He settled on her rug instead, peaceful, understanding his girl no longer needed to sleep with her shoes on. However, recovery isn't always linear. One afternoon, while Carla and Tanya were organizing dog toys in the living room, a letter arrived. Carla held the letter, glancing over to Tanya, who was now guiding Milo to stay with a simple hand signal. "You did that," she remarked. Tanya looked up. "No, we did." Carla smiled and settled down beside her. "You know what most people forget?" She continued. "Adults don't always have the answers." She paused. "But when kids speak, even if it's frightening, even if it's chaotic, it stirs something in everyone else." Tanya considered this briefly, then murmured, "I didn't think anyone would believe me." Carla nodded. "That's why your input was particularly valuable." Later that week, they went back to the backyard for the first time since Milo's training. Carla brought out an old duffel bag filled with harnesses and treats, and Tanya brought her sketch pad. She sat under the tree, sketching out commands, hand signals, and little notes only she could understand. Milo dozed nearby, one paw twitching in his sleep. Kendra came outside, holding 2 lemonades. "I was thinking," she said, handing one to Carla. "Perhaps we could discuss partnering with the local shelter and see if they would allow us to train a couple of dogs there. It would be a small undertaking, just a trial run." Carla raised her eyebrows. "Are you certain?" Kendra replied with a half-smile. "Yes, but I'm tired of being afraid." A few months later, they were conducting weekend sessions at a small training field in the city park. They called it Signals, and word spread slowly. Parents brought kids, shelters brought dogs. Some of the children didn't talk much, some didn't talk at all. Without fail, they appeared every Saturday. Even Milo, despite his advancing age, consistently attended. He remained silent, offering no barks or growls, but observed attentively. Tanya would position herself at the forefront, notebook in hand, providing instructions in concise, easily understood steps. A microphone was unnecessary. People drew near to listen. Periodically, she would look towards Carla, seeking confirmation. Carla would respond with a thumbs up, or occasionally simply offer silent encouragement if you got this. And Tanya succeeded. Individuals who had learned about the case would approach Tanya in public. Some offered thanks, while others remained silent, simply smiling and departing. Tanya didn't require recognition. She found satisfaction in the possibility that someone, somewhere, might now be more likely to believe child. One evening, while closing up the field, Carla asked her, "Do you ever wish that day in court had unfolded differently?" Tanya looked up from brushing Milo's fur. "No, not even a little." She shook her head. If it hadn't occurred as it did, nobody would have witnessed who he truly was. Carla paused. The quiet confidence she held for her niece continued to surprise her. Prior to leaving, they paused before the small painted sign near the gate. It displayed Sig Nulls in red, with a paw print substituting the A. This was Tanya's suggestion. Carla placed her hand on Tanya's shoulder. "You transformed something terrible into something that helps people," she said. Tanya smiled. "He helped me first," she replied. She glanced down at Milo. He blinked up at her, his tail wagging softly. He no longer required instructions. He was already prepared, and perhaps that was the intention. It's often the case that those who appear least imposing possess the most profound insights. And frequently, the most subdued voices resonate most powerfully, particularly when someone or something offers unwavering support. If you've reached this point, thank you. Consider this a prompt to pay close attention, especially when interacting with children, and to trust their instincts when they express discomfort. You may be the only person to do so. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. Remember, there's always someone waiting to be believed. Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat in full. However, when she was discreetly requested to move to the rear of the aircraft, she did not cause a disturbance. The remaining passengers did, and social media quickly followed suit. Marlene Daniels was not a woman who desired much. She had never been. This was true when she dedicated 32 years to Birmingham Public Schools and remained true when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary following her husband's passing. She was reliable. She was resilient. At the age of 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd often advised others to do: take up space. This was the reason she purchased the ticket. Her granddaughter, Alia, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Alia was the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a significant occasion, and Marlene, she planned to attend, positioned prominently, dressed in her best Sunday clothes, and cheering as she once did at those high school basketball games. She had flown previously, certainly, but always in coach. Always quiet. Always practical. This time, however, she reserved a first-class seat. She paid in full. She selected her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of stating, "I'm still here. I'm present." Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she appeared like someone who knew who she was. She wore gray slacks, a pearl gray sweater, small gold earrings, and a leather handbag that bore the marks of years of careful use. Her hair, silver and neatly arranged, was styled in a low twist. A smile touched her lips as she greeted the gate agent. A smile offered not from obligation, but from a genuine desire to be considerate, even when faced with unkindness. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She appreciated the formality. "Miss Daniels." It still carried a certain dignity. As she entered the plane, several passengers in the front cabin briefly looked up. A few offered smiles. A man, appearing to be in his 40s, gave a courteous nod. Seated across the aisle, a younger woman wearing a denim jacket and chunky boots was reading a magazine. Marlene located her seat, 2A, and made herself comfortable. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her sweater, and gazed out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a positive omen. Flight attendants moved along the aisle, arranging luggage and engaging in brief conversations. One offered her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, her smile seeming practiced. Marlene quietly laughed. "Is it that noticeable?" She responded. "You look wonderful," the attendant continued. "Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded graciously and redirected her gaze toward the window, her thoughts drifting to Alia's smile and the swift passage of time. It felt like only yesterday she had been in the front office of Jefferson Middle, observing her granddaughter twirling in her chair while completing paperwork. She relaxed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything appeared tranquil, orderly, and correct. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant stated, differing from the initial attendant. The attendant was young, blonde, with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there appears to have been a seat assignment mix-up. Please move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, seeming to question if she's understood correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked. "There's been a change. A late passenger arrived. The system assigned you to this seat in error. We require this seat to be free." Marlene remained perfectly still. Her voice remained even, and her eyes didn't show any displeasure. She reached into a bag, retrieved the paper boarding pass she always printed, and displayed it. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. It was paid for and chosen by me." The attendant looked at it, then checked the aisle. "I understand. I truly do, but we're aiming to resolve this swiftly before takeoff." The woman in the denim jacket, seated across the aisle, lowered her magazine. She observed her sitting there prior to anyone else boarding. She stated softly. Marlene remained still. "Not yet." Her fingers rested on the chair arms, applying just enough pressure to keep her steady. "I'm not attempting to cause disruption," she said calmly, "but I reserved this seat months ago." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now." Then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag, and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. "Right this way, sir." But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She detected the subtle sounds of passengers arranging themselves, zippers fastening, and safety belts securing. Yet the atmosphere surrounding her felt heavy, resistant to movement. The man now stood almost directly in front of her seat, looking down with an expression that was a blend of confusion and annoyance. "This is two-way, right?" he asked, looking towards the flight attendant, but not Marlene. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Just a minor misunderstanding. We are resolving it now." Marlene spoke with composure, but her voice conveyed firmness. "How is this addressed?" The attendant attempted to maintain a pleasant demeanor. "We simply require you to take seat 19C. It remains a satisfactory seat, and we will ensure you receive compensation for the disruption." "Disruption?" Marlene lifted her eyebrows. "Being asked to vacate the seat I paid for in front of a completely full plane after I had already been seated? That is not a small matter." The man finally made eye contact with her. He did not speak, just gazed. And something about that silence, easy for him, unsettling for her, felt significant. Ma'am, the flight attendant repeated, her voice now more assertive. Please. Marlene glanced around. Silence filled the cabin, but eyes were fixed on her. The man seated across the aisle appeared uneasy, fidgeting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine continued to stare. She didn't desire to create a disturbance. It had never been her way. She had always instructed her students to overcome embarrassment with grace, not noise. At this point, she questioned what she would be conveying if she were to leave unnoticed. However, her dignity couldn't sustain the entire journey. Marlene carefully released her seatbelt, retrieved her bag, and rose. The flight attendant sighed, clearly relieved. Thank you, she stated, and moved to allow the man to take the seat, where he opened his laptop and straightened his tie as if it were a routine occurrence. Marlene held her back straight as she walked along the narrow aisle, passing rows of strangers who didn't meet her gaze. She arrived at row 19, located seat C, and put her bag under the seat without a word. The chair was smaller, situated nearer the restroom, noisy, confined, and not at all what she had anticipated. She settled in quietly, feeling a stinging in her eyes. A man seated across the row, a teenager wearing headphones, looked at her with a questioning expression. She gave him a weary smile. A weight settled in her chest, not from the seat itself, but from the lack of surprise. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that circumstances had changed. That at her age, following her considerable contributions to others, she wouldn't need to demonstrate her right to what she had purchased. She glanced down at her hands, noticing a slight tremor. Her wedding band remained on her finger, even after so many years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had dedicated her life to her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked. Marlene leaned her head against the window. She remained silent, her gaze fixed. Then, a subtle change occurred. Excuse me? The voice came from the woman wearing a denim jacket, who had now risen to her feet. Hello, she said, her tone clear enough for Rose to hear. What transpired here doesn't feel right. Marlene turned, visibly surprised. The woman continued, gesturing towards the front. That lady had her seat initially. I observed her checking in and taking her assigned seat. She presented a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? What was the reason for that? A moment of silence followed. Several passengers glanced upward, seemingly attentive. A flight attendant hurried over, attempting to soothe the woman. I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving, she said. No, the woman responded, her voice rising. You moved her because you believed she wouldn't speak out. But I will, and she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin, which had just moments before been filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight conversation, was now utterly silent. Marlene remained still. She remained in 19C, uncertain whether to feel embarrassed or thankful. Perhaps both. She observed the woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with a confident posture and eyes filled with frustration, firmly holding her position. I'm sorry, the woman continued, now speaking to everyone nearby. But you can't ignore what just occurred. You moved that woman from her purchased seat, offering no reason. And this man, she indicated towards 2, simply walked in as if everything was normal. The gentleman in the seat glanced up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He remained silent. Why? The woman insisted. And I want the rest of the plane to hear, because this isn't correct. The flight attendant paused. She began to speak, but then glanced around. Passengers were turning to look. Phones appeared. A red-haired teenager 2 rows back, had his camera aimed directly forward, recording openly. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. People's gazes were moving. Tension increased. Suddenly, a voice from row 3 interrupted. She is correct. A man, appearing to be in his late 40s, with a beard streaked with gray and wearing a worn Detroit Tigers cap, rose partially from his seat. I observed it as well. She was already present, holding a boarding pass. You moved her without justification, and honestly, I am not satisfied with that. The flight crew exchanged looks. Another attendant, taller, older, possibly more experienced, approached, placing a hand lightly on the younger woman's arm. "We will be able to discuss this once we are airborne," he stated. The woman in denim remained still. "No, you speak now. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate action. And if no one else is going to voice it, I will. That woman was repositioned because you believed she wouldn't object due to her age. And let's be frank, because she is black." That word resonated like a sharp rebuke in the quiet. Marlene averted her eyes. She felt a flush rise up her neck. She had never enjoyed being the focus of attention. A voice arose from the rear of the cabin. "That's unfair," a younger man murmured. "There's no way that should have occurred." Another person then spoke, their voice raised. "Return her seat." The man wearing a two-way radio seemed uneasy and finally closed his laptop. He glanced at the flight crew. "Honestly, I don't need the seat if it's going to cause a disturbance," he stated. "I simply took the one they assigned to me." The assertive woman responded with a derisive laugh. "You observed her relocation and didn't inquire, not even once." He shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact. "It's not my responsibility." The flight attendant tried to manage the situation. "We recognize emotions are intense. Let's resolve this promptly so we can depart on time." However, the man wearing the Tiger's cap interrupted. "Not until she receives her seat back." He turned and addressed Marlene. "Ma'am," he said, "would you like your seat back?" She paused. She had dedicated much of her life to instructing others on how to utilize their voice to champion what is just. Now her own trembled. "I don't want to be the cause of this flight being delayed," she stated quietly. "You are not," the woman from row 2 responded. "You are the reason it might finally be rectified." That was when it occurred. The man in row 4 rose, followed by a couple situated behind him. "If she doesn't receive her seat," someone declared, "we are not sitting either." Flight attendants began to panic. Someone reached for the phone to contact the pilot. The aircraft doors remained open, and established procedures were now being implemented. The chief flight attendant returned, visibly agitated. "We need to halt boarding," a fellow passenger interjected. "It's too late. The planes are full. Resolve this immediately." Marlene rose deliberately. Her hands were steady now. "I didn't request this situation," she stated. "However, I will not remain here and pretend I didn't receive what I paid for. I secured seat 2A. I checked in promptly. I adhered to every guideline. Throughout my life, I've adhered to every guideline." Then, suddenly, the man in 2A rose. He offered no apology. He avoided eye contact. He simply took his laptop and proceeded toward the rear of the plane. The crew swiftly assisted Marlene in returning to the front. As she passed, numerous passengers acknowledged her with nods. Several offered words of encouragement. "Good for you. You didn't deserve that." "We saw." She resumed her seat in 2A. The armrests felt altered this time. Not stiff, not cold. By the time the plane departed, the video had already been uploaded online. As the aircraft ascended through the clouds, the mood within the cabin remained subdued. Marlene was seated in 2A, her hands calmly resting in her lap. She had not consumed the offered beverage. It wasn't necessary. Her mind was occupied. She felt no anger, not a vocal expression of it. She was considering her granddaughter, reflecting on the world Alia was entering with that degree. This incident, this small public humiliation, wasn't unprecedented. However, something about it felt different this time. In row 18, a teenager with red hair had already posted a 23-second video to TikTok with a caption, "They move an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude." The entire plane seemed to agree. The reactions were immediate. "That's disgusting. She deserves to have that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them." By the time the flight landed in Indiana, 3 influencers had compiled a video that was distributed by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and it had already surpassed 80,000 views. Marlene was unaware of any of this. She was still arranging her sweater and getting ready to text Alia upon arriving at the terminal. Her phone had remained turned off throughout the flight. As passengers exited the aircraft, several briefly touched her arm. "Your class act," they said. "Glad they made it right." She softly expressed her gratitude, her eyes appearing warm yet weary. She felt unsure how to react to the focus. A portion of her longed to retreat into the airport bustle, simply taking her shuttle and heading into town. However, upon activating her phone, it vibrated and vibrated again. Numerous messages arrived, some from her children, others from past colleagues, and even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her youngest son, Louis, had attempted to call her 3 times. She accepted the call on the 4th ring. "Mama," he said, his voice already filled with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why? You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone has a video of you standing up for yourself. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. I didn't even know she was filming. She captured everything. They attempted to displace you from a seat you paid for, and people are reacting strongly. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Yes, you did," Louis stated. By the time she reached the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 additional calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from the Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, allowing the shuttle to rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. A college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie sat beside her. She looked at Marlene, paused briefly, then shifted in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began hesitantly. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one in the video?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" The girl smiled. "People share things that are important, and this was important." Marlene paused. "It's odd. I didn't intend to be involved in something like this." The girl spoke softly, saying it hadn't been planned. However, she acknowledged that Marlene had managed the situation in a manner that resonated with many. Marlene returned a smile, then glanced out the window, observing the passing billboards and highway signs. She had simply intended to attend a graduation, and now the entire country was discussing the event. However, the airline remained silent, an unsettling silence. By the time Marlene arrived at her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already appearing in the subject lines of press releases. Unofficially, naturally, no company was willing to acknowledge anything that could incur a financial cost. However, the airline, Coastal Air, was aware of the situation. They had viewed the videos, read the online discussions, and hastily convened in private meetings. Marlene's phone rang again as she entered the elevator. An unfamiliar number. She allowed it to proceed to voicemail. She felt weary. She had traveled across 2 states, experienced humiliation, then received applause, and subsequently been drawn into a situation she hadn't requested. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Ollie across that stage. Her room overlooked a small park where families walked dogs and students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV. Local news was already on. The video, now exceeding 2.3 million views in under 12 hours, depicts what seems to be an elderly black woman being requested to relocate from her designated seat in the first-class cabin to make room for a younger white passenger. Other passengers on board stepped in, and the woman was ultimately returned to her original seat. She silenced the notification. Her phone vibrated again, a text from Louis. "Coastal Air has released a statement. It's underwhelming." She clicked the link. The official statement read, "We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced." Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the time she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She avoided using that term, especially after incidents occurred. That evening, she accepted a phone call. "Marlene Daniels?" The voice was distinct and resolute. It belonged to a woman, professional in tone. Yes, speaking. This was Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We're interested in having you on our show tomorrow morning, just to briefly discuss your experience. It won't be intrusive. You're seen as representing something larger, and people are paying attention. Marlene hesitated. I'm not a symbol, she replied. I know, Nina responded, her voice gentle and sincere. That's why her refusal of the interview felt significant, at least for the time being. A quiet impulse arose within her. She had dedicated her life to assisting others in expressing themselves. Perhaps now was her opportunity to speak out once more. The following morning, she composed a handwritten note. It was brief, a single page in length, but each word was carefully chosen. She began with the sentence, I wasn't trying to go viral. I attempted to see my granddaughter. She spoke about dignity, about how simple it is to overlook older individuals, about what it feels like to be marginalized, not for the first time, but for the thousandth. And she concluded with this. I spent decades telling young people they were important, that their presence was important, that they belonged. I still believe that. But sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge. She entrusted the letter to Lewis, who shared it on his social media with her consent. Within hours, by lunchtime, it had accumulated over 400,000 shares. Her story appeared on talk shows. An op-ed piece in the Indianapolis Journal commended her composure. Civil rights advocates incorporated her letter into speeches and public events. A particular comment resonated with her. It originated from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. My mother experienced a time when she was pushed out of a bank queue and dismissed it with a laugh. She stated, people like us don't make noise. I wish she could have witnessed this. Ms. Daniels, thank you. Your words helped me remember not to dismiss things so easily. Marlene was seated near the window, holding her phone and a letter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't protested. She hadn't created a video. She simply stated the facts. However, the crucial moment she awaited hadn't arrived. It was pending on a campus stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marlene hadn't slept well. Amidst the news reports, the communications, and the sensation of being observed by countless unseen individuals, finding peace had been challenging. Yet, her steps were firm as she entered the campus of Purdue University, her focus resolute. She wore a navy blue dress and a coordinating hat, the very one she'd reserved for a significant occasion. This was that occasion. She was unconcerned if people recognized her now. Let them. Today was not about her. She was there to witness her granddaughter's walk. The stadium seating was almost completely full when she located her row. A security guard approached her, held her gaze for a moment, then smiled. Ms. Daniels, yes? He said, I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground. She nodded warmly. Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter. He reached into his pocket and continued. The dean of students asked me to escort you to a reserved section. For family. It has a better view. Marlene paused, questioning, reserved for whom? He smiled. For you. She followed him upwards to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was designated with a folded card. Mrs. Marlene Daniels. Guest of honor. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a spotlight. There was no podium, just a seat, and it belonged to her. Offered, not taken. Shortly, the ceremony commenced. Names were announced. Gowns flowed. Applause resounded. Then, Alia Denise Daniels. The name resonated through the air like a church bell. Marlene watched as her granddaughter advanced. Tall, radiant, her eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She saw her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile wavered, only to return, fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. Following the ceremony, the family assembled beneath a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already debating who was taking whom to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was adjusting her youngest shirt. Alia hurried to her and embraced her grandmother's waist, almost dislodging the hat. You made it, she murmured. Naturally I did. Marlene responded. Do you imagine a seating error would prevent me? They laughed, lingering in the embrace. Alia retreated, her eyes glistening. I witnessed everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I'm receiving messages from students at school, professors, classmates, individuals I don't even know. You've instigated conversations. I didn't attempt to, Marlene stated. I simply didn't want to remain silent anymore. Alia concurred. Perhaps we don't always have to raise our voices. But when we do speak, people should pay attention. Later that afternoon, while gathering her belongings back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slid under her door. It bore the Coastal Air logo in an embossed design. The letter contained an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit, with all expenses covered. They described it as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call, said a representative. We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands. I'm flattered, Marlene said plainly, but I won't be attending. The woman on the other end paused. May I ask why? Marlene responded, I wasn't moved to speak for your company. I spoke because my dignity fell out of place in row 19. She concluded the call softly and settled onto the bed's edge, observing a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind swirled leaves in lazy circles. She didn't require a public forum. She had already conveyed her message, and it was apparent without explicit statement. This time, the seat wasn't withheld from her. It was presented. She simply declined to occupy it. However, there was one final matter she needed to address. The information wasn't shared with the airline, nor with reporters. It was for all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, observing the activity on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of untold stories. She sipped coffee from paper cup, her hands now steady. The commotion had subsided. News cycles had moved on. Trending topics had displaced her face with fresh headlines. And that was acceptable. Marlene's actions weren't motivated by a desire for attention. They stemmed from an internal resistance to diminishing. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from an unknown sender, a retired nurse in Arizona. The message read, I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to. Marlene reread the message, then put her phone away and surveyed the terminal. People passed by her, pulling carry-on bags, enjoying lattes, and holding onto their children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wore her usual gray sweater and pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. Yet, if one observed carefully, there was a certain quality to her demeanor, a quiet strength that surpassed mere physical bearing. She recalled the many years she had dedicated to assuring her students they mattered, instilling in young black girls the importance of carrying themselves with confidence, articulating their thoughts with precision, and refusing to allow others to diminish their worth. She believed she had concluded imparting this guidance upon her retirement. She was mistaken. Self-respect is inherent. It isn't acquired through achievement or dependent on positions, designations, or connections. It isn't bestowed by unfamiliar individuals, and it cannot be compromised when circumstances deem it problematic for another. It is rightfully yours, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. That was the core principle. It resonated not only with those who observed her movement down the plane aisle, but with the reserved individuals. Those who suppressed their dignity countless times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms. Those who've been subtly indicated to relinquish their seat, either physically or figuratively, to someone deemed more significant. Marlene's story wasn't concerning revenge. It wasn't reflecting anger. It wasn't even focused on that man or that airline. The memory centered on the decision she made, resolving that she wouldn't remain silent for anyone. Just before her flight was scheduled to board, she rose and stretched. A young girl close by gently pulled on her mother's sleeve and murmured, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene offered a slight smile. It wasn't a broad smile, nor one seeking acknowledgement. It was the type of smile that conveyed, I am aware of my identity. As she proceeded toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her initial journey appeared, though in a different uniform on a different day. The woman looked up, a flash of recognition in her eyes. She offered a brief nod. Marlene stated simply, "Good morning." Nothing more, nothing less. A lengthy explanation wasn't necessary. Applause wasn't required. She possessed something more valuable: serenity. As the gate opened and boarding commenced, Marlene didn't hurry. She waited patiently. She proceeded deliberately, and, upon reaching her row, yes, first class once more, she positioned her bag under the seat, took a seat, and gazed out the window. The sky stretched endlessly. She remained silent for the entire flight because she felt no need to speak. Occasionally, the most impactful declaration is simply holding your place, particularly when others anticipate you to relinquish it. Therefore, if you're hearing this and you've ever felt diminished for asserting yourself, recall Marlene Daniels. Not because she became widely known online, but because she never increased her volume, and yet everyone understood her. If this narrative resonated with you, please share it. Speak when you are able. Remain in your seat when required. And most importantly, never allow another person to determine when your dignity is present. A judge publicly fined her concerning a small cross necklace, believing she was simply another person present. However, when she rose and spoke, the entire courtroom became quiet, and the subsequent events left even the bailiff astonished. Alana Merriweather did not go to the Rutherford County Courthouse, anticipating conflict. She went to support her younger cousin, Deshawn, who'd been arrested following a routine traffic stop that had escalated into a considerably larger matter. She requested a day of leave from work, chose a navy blue blouse, slacks, and flats. The outfit was simple and understated, yet respectful. A delicate gold chain with a small cross hung around her neck. It was not ostentatious, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. Someone did notice. The courtroom was full. It contained people awaiting their turns, lawyers reviewing documents, and deputies positioned along the walls. Alana settled into the second row, remaining quiet and composed. Her purse rested in her lap. She nodded softly to her cousin, who appeared exhausted from stress, his eyes weighed down by fatigue. He remained silent, offering her a look of thanks. That was sufficient. Judge Raymond Keller entered with his characteristic formal walk. The judge was known for a particular demeanor. Across Murfreesboro and in surrounding areas, lawyers spoke of his meticulous nature, traditional, direct, and unyielding. A Vietnam veteran who transitioned to a legal career, he regarded the courtroom as a space of great importance. His space. The bailiff called the room to order. Before proceeding, Judge Keller addressed the room, looking at the attendees as he said, "I'd like to address a matter of decorum." He looked directly at Alana. "You, ma'am, the one in blue. Please rise." Alana blinked, surprised, and slowly stood. Her heart thudded a little faster, but she kept her posture straight. "You're wearing a religious symbol," he said, his voice firm. "That's not permitted in my courtroom. Neutrality matters here." A fine of $50 was levied for disrupting court decorum. The room fell silent. Some individuals adjusted in their seats. Others averted their gaze, visibly uncomfortable. Alana did not respond immediately. She was familiar with being publicly singled out, questioned, and dismissed, yet she still felt surprised. A fine? For wearing a necklace? She glanced at the bailiff, then back to the judge. "Your Honor," she stated calmly, "is this a published policy? Could you please direct me to the statute or court rule that permits that penalty?" Keller showed no visible reaction. "This is my courtroom. I established the procedures." Alana nodded thoughtfully. "I comprehend that, sir. However, are those procedures documented anywhere?" He fixed his gaze on her for a brief moment. "You may pay the fine at the clerk's desk, or you may depart." She detected a quiet intake of breath from someone seated behind her. Alana remained still. She did not speak louder. She did not engage in debate. She merely inclined her head slightly and stated, "I am not leaving." A gentleman in the front row, an older man wearing a tan suit, lifted his eyebrow. His gaze moved from her to Judge Keller and back again. Judge Keller slowly straightened his robe. Then you will be held in contempt? The bailiff subtly changed his stance. The prosecutor set aside his file. A palpable change occurred. The atmosphere felt denser, not with theatrics, but with focused concentration. Alana released a single breath through her nose. I'm here to support my cousin, Deshaun Grissom. The charges are being formally presented today, and he requested my presence. I'm not intending to cause any disturbance, Your Honor. However, I contend that this fine is not only unjust, but potentially unlawful. Judge Keller moved forward a little. Did you question my jurisdiction? Her expression remained unchanged. I am requesting an explanation of the policy and its legal basis. He hesitated briefly. It was slight, almost unnoticeable, but the pause was present. He did not anticipate that. Who are you? He inquired, his voice growing tense. My name is Alana Meriwether, she replied, and I'm a constitutional attorney licensed in 3 states, including Tennessee. The courtroom cracked open. You could almost feel the collective intake of breath. Someone whispered under their breath, damn. She continued, measured and composed. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2010. I've worked for the Southern Center for Human Rights, and I currently serve as senior counsel at a nonprofit based in Memphis. I am present as a family member, but I understand the law, and I am aware of my rights. Keller relaxed back in his chair. For the first time, he appeared uneasy, not angry, simply unsteady. She could have smiled. She refrained. The ensuing silence was palpable. The judge began to speak, but stopped, instead rearranging the papers on his desk. However, the judge was unaware of who he was addressing. Alana did not grow up with wealth. She was raised in Jackson, Mississippi, in a faded brick duplex off of Robinson Road. Denise, her mother, held overnight shifts at the Willow Creek nursing home, and her father left when she was 8. Resources were scarce, but a set of principles guided them. Speak with clarity. Avoid minimizing your worth. Assert yourself when injustice occurs, but maintain composure and a dignified demeanor. By the age of 16, Alana had studied the Constitution from beginning to end on 2 separate occasions. She sought to comprehend the disparate treatment experienced by individuals like herself in courtrooms, offices, stores, and even churches. Her motivation wasn't anger, but rather a genuine curiosity. There was also a deeper element at play, a quiet determination. People consistently underestimated her, not only due to her brown skin or her choice to wear her hair natural, but also in subtle ways, like overlooking her in meetings. She remembered the way older male attorneys would address her as young lady, within rooms filled with men experiencing thinning hair and fragile egos. She quickly understood that possessing brilliance was insufficient. There were times when it needed to be carried quietly, allowing them to believe they were more astute, until they unwittingly stepped into a carefully constructed plan. When Alana was accepted into Harvard Law, it felt less like a joyous occasion and more like a validation. She had previously informed her high school counselor that her aspiration was to become a civil rights attorney. A genuine laugh escaped her. Then, she cautioned that law school presented fierce competition and wasn't necessarily a viable option. Alana remained silent. She simply intensified her studies. While attending Harvard, she wasn't boisterous. She found no need to be. She consistently occupied the front row of each constitutional law class, rapidly taking notes and posing questions that caused professors to pause. People began to observe her, yet still regarded her as unusual. This perception never felt satisfactory to her. After graduating, she declined 2 offers from large firms seeking impactful work. She spent several years in Alabama, defending minors within the legal system. Then, she moved to Memphis to join a nonprofit dedicated to combating housing discrimination. While she didn't gain widespread recognition, her work secured people's release from jail and kept families in their homes, transforming lives. Throughout this, she consistently wore her small gold cross, a deeply personal symbol. The brooch had been her grandmother's, accompanied by a handwritten note. It read, "Wear this when you need to be reminded you're not alone." Her grandmother never removed it. Not once. not even in court. Therefore, when Judge Keller singled her out, calling her out as if she were a disruptive teenager in detention, it didn't unsettle her. It evoked memories of the instances she's experienced being looked at and not truly seen. They never anticipated her. They anticipated the boisterous one, the angry one. There was someone poised to lash out or leave abruptly. Instead, they experienced something else entirely, a demonstration of precision, control, and strength through composure. This wasn't unprecedented. In 2017, within a courtroom in Little Rock, she observed a public defender struggle during a bail hearing. The judge seemed disengaged. The defendant, a 19-year-old facing trespassing charges at an abandoned building, was on the verge of being assigned $1,500 bail, an amount he was unlikely to afford. Alana rose, introduced herself, and referenced 3 Arkansas statutes that the judge seemed to have missed. The judge conceded. Bail was waived. The defendant was released that same day. That demonstrated her character. Consequently, sitting in Rutherford County, facing a fine for a necklace of great personal significance, before a judge who believed he could compel her to be silent, Alana remained steadfast. She straightened her posture. When she introduced herself to the courtroom, her name, her qualifications, her purpose for being present, it wasn't intended for Judge Keller. It was directed toward everyone who perceived her as simply someone's relative. However, today wasn't a day when silence was an option. The courtroom remained quiet for an unusually long time. Judge Keller shuffled papers, seemingly stalling. But Alana remained still, her hands clasped before her, patiently waiting. Not contesting, merely waiting. From the far corner, the prosecutor subtly adjusted his posture, his fingers still. The bailiff's gaze moved between Keller and Alana. A change was palpable. The room's power dynamic had altered. It wasn't solely emanating from the bench. Keller spoke, clearing his throat. This court will proceed with the next case. He refrained from mentioning the fine again, at least for now. However, the absence of his usual reprimand was keenly observed. Deshawn's case was then called. He remained standing, still wearing the wrinkled button-down shirt from county lockup. He looked at Alana, his eyes reflecting both pride and concern. She offered him a singular, composed glance, a look conveying, "Don't panic. I've got this." The public defender approached the table. However, before he could speak, Alana moved forward. "Your Honor," she stated distinctly, "with the court's permission, I would like to represent Mr. Grissom today. I've reviewed the charges and spoken with him. He desires me to stand in his defense." Judge Keller looked up. "You aren't listed as counsel. I presented my bar card. My Tennessee license is current. You can verify with the Board of Professional Responsibility I am listed as Alana Joy Merriweather." He paused a moment too long and then nodded once. "Proceed." Alana moved to stand beside Deshawn. Her cousin appeared to want to laugh and cry simultaneously. She placed one hand gently on his shoulder as she turned to address the court. Mr. Grissom was stopped due to a non-functioning tail light. The arrest report indicates he was asked to leave the vehicle and subjected to a search without consent. No warrant was present. The officer's statement made no mention of probable cause. Additionally, the encounter progressed to resisting arrest when he inquired about the reason for being handcuffed. He did not raise his voice, nor did he threaten anyone. She retrieved a document from her purse. "I've submitted a written motion to dismiss, supported by 3 Tennessee Supreme Court rulings. Each affirms that a warrantless search under these circumstances constitutes a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Additionally, the resisting arrest charge lacks supporting video evidence, despite officers wearing department-issued body cams." The room was still again. Alana frowned, leaned back, and accepted the motion from the clerk. He reviewed it. It was evident. With a rapid scan of the room and a slight twitch of his jaw, Alana remained silent. She stood motionless, allowing him to read, while ensuring her presence was undeniable. Behind her, people subtly adjusted their positions, not from disinterest, but from focused attention. This was no longer the woman they believed was in distress just moments prior. This was a different person altogether. Judge Keller looked up. "You wrote this motion yourself?" "I did." I prepared this draft last night following a review of the police report and a conversation regarding the arrest with Mr. Grissom, and I am not affiliated with a law firm. I am employed by a civil rights nonprofit. Our organization focuses on due process violations, housing discrimination, and wrongful convictions. The judge tapped the motion lightly on the desk. Your client's record? No prior arrests. No violent offenses. He's a full-time electrician's apprentice, simply trying to get to work on time the day this occurred. Another long silence. Keller turned to the prosecutor. State's position? The prosecutor paused. We'd be willing to dismiss the resisting charge. Maintain the traffic infraction. Alana spoke again, her voice resolute. We'd agree to that only with the court confirmation that the search was unlawful. Mr. Grissom deserves that documented. It was a confident move. No apologies. No hesitation. Simply a direct, justifiable request supported by legal precedent. Keller observed her. The courtroom rarely witnessed such assertiveness. A woman, a black woman, effortlessly navigating legal procedures. She did so without displaying anger or arrogance, simply presenting clear and precise facts. He adjusted his glasses. The motion to dismiss was granted. The traffic infraction remains with a warning, and no fines will be assessed. Alana offered a subtle nod, devoid of a smile or celebratory gestures. She then turned to Deshawn. You're free to go. He paused momentarily, as if his body needed time to process the news. Subsequently, he left the defendant's table and embraced her firmly. A murmur rippled through the courtroom once more. It wasn't regarding the case itself, but about her. However, what Alana did next silenced everyone. Instead of returning to her place, she faced the bench, her voice remaining calm. Before I sit down, Your Honor, I would like to formally challenge the fine issued earlier this morning. Keller visibly recoiled, as if startled. Do you want to reopen that matter? He asked. Yes, sir, she replied. You stated that religious symbols were not permitted in your courtroom. However, unless this courtroom is functioning under martial law, the First Amendment remains applicable. Her tone was measured. She did not need to raise her voice. In County of Allegheny versus ACLU, the Supreme Court underscored the requirement for government institutions to maintain neutrality rather than hostility towards religion. Prohibiting a small cross pendant, particularly from an individual who is not testifying or speaking to the court at that moment, does not represent neutrality. The action appeared as targeted suppression, and the gallery had gone completely still. Alana advanced 1 foot. Additionally, there was no written policy displayed, no public signage indicating the ban, and no prior warning provided. I am found without citation, without precedent, and without any attempt to verify my intent or role in the proceedings. Keller adjusted in his seat. His face had lost some of its typical composure. One could observe something stirring behind his eyes, calculation, doubt, perhaps even shame. Are you suggesting the court violated your rights? He inquired. Alana remained motionless. I am not making accusations. I am presenting established facts. I request the fine be rescinded, and the court record should indicate that this incident transpired outside established protocol. The prosecutor glanced up momentarily, then resumed, looking down. The bailiff's hands were now clasped before him, his jaw tense, and his posture more formal. Keller hesitated before replying. He fixed his gaze on her for a prolonged, intense period. Then he announced, the fine is withdrawn. This wouldn't be documented. Alana offered a brief nod. Thank you, Your Honor. She pivoted and proceeded to her place with composure. Murmurs arose once more. However, this time, they weren't filled with uncertainty. Instead, they conveyed interest and deference. A woman seated behind her silently asked another, Who is she? Alana remained uninvolved. She simply took her seat, retrieved her notebook, and gently opened it to a fresh page. The judge, for the first time that morning, seemed to be truly contemplating. His movements became more deliberate. He examined the files with greater attention. The issue he's ignited by the fine for the necklace had escalated. It had become something more significant. The prosecutor spoke quietly to the bailiff, who acknowledged with a nod and jotted a note. The shift was noticeable. Court reconvened. Several more cases were heard. However, the usual flow was disrupted. The observers were no longer focused on the legal charges. Their gazes repeatedly returned to Alana Merriweather, the woman who had corrected a judge without raising her voice. 30 minutes elapsed. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Keller called for a brief recess. He rose and exited through the side door silently. Alana remained seated. The bailiff approached her slowly. "Mom," he said, softer than previously, "may I pose a question to you?" She turned her head slightly. "Of course. Did you anticipate that occurring? Regarding the fine? Concerning everything?" Alana emitted the slightest laugh through her nose. "No, I was unaware of that, but I wasn't willing to ignore it." The bailiff touched the back of his neck. "I've been here for 8 years," he said. "Never seen him back down like that." "He's not a bad man," she said softly. "But power without accountability is dangerous," he agreed. It wasn't a matter of obligation, but comprehension. Further down the hall, 2 court reporters spoke quietly. The younger one appeared visibly shaken. She was familiar with every case, reciting them easily. "Lawyer?" one asked. "Yes, from Harvard. Can you believe that?" She attended to support her cousin and unexpectedly challenged the judge. The courtroom observers expressed disbelief. However, Alana felt no sense of triumph. She found no pleasure in undermining someone. Her purpose wasn't to shame Keller. She simply sought justice. When it was lacking, she created it herself, carefully and deliberately. Yet, a subtle shift began to appear in Judge Keller's gaze. Upon his return to the courtroom, Judge Keller seemed altered. His posture lacked its previous rigidity. He appeared unchanged in stature, simply quieter. No longer seemed a man attempting to maintain authority, but rather someone attempting to grasp how he relinquished it without awareness. He took a seat, adjusted his glasses, and proceeded to the next case. Even his voice had diminished in tone. It was subtly altered, almost imperceptible to an ordinary observer, yet Alana recognized it. She had witnessed this previously. Men in positions of influence struggling with a reality they resisted acknowledging. That they had transgressed a boundary, and someone unanticipated had retaliated. As the courtroom emptied and people moved towards the exit, Keller remained seated on the bench, his gaze fixed forward. Alana collected her belongings and was nearing the door when she heard him call out, "Ms. Merriweather." She paused and turned, her face showing no emotion. He rose from his seat and descended the steps deliberately, as if considering each one. "I'd like a word, if you're willing." The bailiff seemed uneasy, questioning whether this was a directive or a private inquiry. Alana offered a subtle nod, then turned to Deshawn. "Give me 5, she murmured to him. Keller refrained from escorting her into chambers. They remained just outside the vacant courtroom, maintaining enough distance for some discretion, yet remaining visible. He cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Alana didn't reply. Not yet. She allowed him to formulate his thoughts. "I formed an assumption," he proceeded, "an inequitable one, regarding your intentions, regarding your position. I was mistaken," she responded gently, but without resentment. He lowered his gaze. "That's the difficulty, isn't it? One shouldn't need to be." Another pause. "I have dedicated 32 years to that bench," Keller stated, "and I have valued order, structure, neutrality. But you help me understand, occasionally what we consider neutral is simply convenient for those already in power." The statement impacted him more profoundly than anticipated. Alana simply looked at him, maintaining steady, respectful eye contact. There was no trace of ego, only honesty in her silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he stated, "but I will say this. I won't forget today." Alana offered a slight nod. "That's all I hoped for." She prepared to leave, but he called out to her one last time. "If you're ever back in Murfreesboro, I'd be honored to hear you argue again." That element genuinely surprised her. "I hope not to need to," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. They both understood the unspoken meaning behind her words. The sun had risen higher, and the heat was intense. Deshawn stood near the sidewalk, looking at his phone. He brightened when he saw her. "What is that?" he asked, astonished. Alana shrugged, retrieving her keys from her purse. Just a small civics lesson. Seriously, you confronted a judge. In his home. She gave him a look. Don't make it sound heroic. I didn't go there to fight. I want to hear what he had to say. When someone attempts to diminish your importance for reasons related to your identity, you face a choice. Remain silent or voice your perspective. Deshawn leaned against her car, nodding slowly. I swear, if I didn't know you better, I'd say you rehearsed that, I remarked. She laughed. I didn't, but maybe I should start writing it down. At that moment, a local reporter from the Murfreesboro News Journal approached, holding a voice recorder and a notebook. Ms. Merriweather? Alana turned. I observed what unfolded. Our readers would likely appreciate hearing your perspective. Would you consider an interview? She looked at Deshawn, then returned her gaze to the reporter. Let me consider that. The reporter offered her a card and stepped back. You prompted considerable thought today. Such occurrences are infrequent in court. As I walked toward the car, Deshawn remarked, they will discuss this, you know. Alana shrugged again. Let them, however, what transpired outside the courtroom held equal significance. As Alana and Deshawn arrived at his apartment complex on the west side of Murfreesboro, his phone was constantly buzzing. Calls, texts, and even direct messages flooded in. A cousin in Chattanooga had already learned the news. A friend from high school had sent a screenshot of a local news blog displaying the headline. Attorney silently dismantles courtroom bias. Judge withdraws fine, dismisses case. Deshawn looked at her, his eyes wide. It's already on the internet? Alana offered a small smile. I mentioned to you, people discuss events, particularly when expectations aren't met. She did not seek recognition. Not currently. Not in the past. However, there were occasions when being noticed wasn't a decision. It was a consequence of acting correctly when the option of remaining unnoticed wasn't available. Afterward that evening, she was at her kitchen table, drinking tea, the small cross necklace still on her collarbone. Her inbox contained numerous messages, some from familiar people, others from unknown individuals. Several legal blogs had already published summaries. A user on Twitter had shared a clip from the live stream, adding the caption, "This is how you correct injustice," without ever raising your voice. However, Alana wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was considering a statement from Judge Keller. What we often consider neutral is simply convenient for those already wielding the authority. That observation resonated with her. She recalled her childhood, holding her grandmother's hand during evening church service. The pastor's words resonated. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is not shout. It's stand. Initially, it seemed like a poetic statement. Now it felt genuine. The following day, she returned to her position at the nonprofit office in Memphis. Her colleagues did not alter their behavior toward her. There were no celebratory balloons or enthusiastic applause. Instead, one of the interns presented her with a file and requested she review a housing complaint by noon. She appreciated the normalcy of it. Information still circulated, even without her direct involvement. A week later, she received a call from the Middle Tennessee State University Law Department. They were planning a community forum concerning courtroom ethics and bias, and a member of their board had recommended her as a speaker. She nearly declined. Nearly. Then she recalled the courtroom, the shift in people's gaze when they recognized her as an individual, and how many others remained voiceless, awaiting someone to advocate for them. Consequently, she consented to participate in the forum. 14 days later, a pastor from a church in Smyrna contacted her. He requested that she address their youth group regarding the law, its true meaning, its protective function, and how it can be applied equitably if individuals understand how to ensure its accountability. She accepted the invitation. She continued to agree, not due to enjoying the focus, but because the narrative was no longer solely hers. It belonged to all who had ever occupied the rear of a courtroom and considered, "They won't hear me." She had never shared this with Keller. However, that day had also altered her. She frequently reflected on him. She questioned whether he retained that moment within his memory as she did. If he ever observed someone in his courtroom differently afterward, perhaps with increased consideration, perhaps with a touch more humility. She hoped so. One Friday afternoon, as she was leaving the office, she noticed an envelope affixed to her door. It bore no name and no return address, only her name typed neatly. Inside was a brief note that read, Ms. Merriweather, I've revised the courtroom conduct guidelines. Religious attire or symbols, unless disruptive, will no longer be penalized. That was all. There was no apology. No signature appeared beyond the initials. Yet it was sufficient. She folded the note and placed it within her grandmother's Bible. Alana Merriweather didn't seek recognition. She desired equity. Certain narratives briefly capture attention before fading. Others resonate deeply, altering perspectives, even without direct interaction with the individual who initiated that change. For Alana Merriweather, that courtroom moment represented not a culmination, but a segment within a more extensive narrative. A narrative encompassing decisions largely unseen by others. For instance, staying up all night to assist a tenant contesting an unlawful eviction. Dealing with late-night calls from worried mothers whose sons were detained without bail. Or traveling 3 hours to a courthouse in Jackson simply to observe a judge who was reported to be unfairly treating defendants with limited financial resources. She made no introductions. She simply observed, documented her findings, and waited for discernible trends to emerge. When questioned about her composure and restraint in the face of disrespect, she consistently replied, I know what I carry. She didn't need to demonstrate its weight to show it was heavy. That courtroom didn't alter her. It simply reinforced why she selected this profession initially. Not for recognition, not for retribution, for respect. She had no desire to embarrass Judge Keller. She aimed to make him consider. And in that, she was successful. Some time passed, and during a talk with a group of teenage girls at a public charter school in Memphis, one of them asked, Weren't you the woman who spoke directly to the judge and caused him to appear mistaken? Alana responded with a smile. I didn't speak directly to him. I spoke with purpose. And I didn't cause him to appear mistaken. I offered him an opportunity to reconsider. The girls seemed surprised. Isn't that essentially the same thing? Alana replied, Not in the slightest. Several of the girls chuckled, but a few seemed to take her words to heart. Those were the ones she intended to reach. She continued, The goal isn't to win arguments. It's to win ground, so the next person doesn't have to fight the same fight. That resonated with them, just as it resonated with her. She understood her story might disappear from news feeds. The tweets, the blogs, the clipped videos, they'd all be lost eventually. But someone would remember. Someone in the gallery who witnessed that moment unfold. Someone who'd felt invisible that day and walked out feeling a little stronger. That was sufficient. Some individuals enter a space seeking attention. Others, like Alana, enter, communicate with precision, and leave a lasting impact. The gold cross remained a daily adornment. She would be prepared again if another courtroom attempted to challenge its presence. For invariably, someone will attempt to diminish you to align with their expectations. And equally, a decision will always present itself, to diminish or to stand, to speak or to allow silence to convey your message. She elected to stand, with insight, not with empty words, not with arrogance, but with a clear objective. And that's what caused people to recall, not that she achieved victory, but how she achieved it. If this narrative resonated with you even slightly, if it prompted thought, emotion, or introspection, then please don't keep it private. Subscribe, distribute it, and help spread it. You never know when your steady voice might be the one that transforms the atmosphere.